Okay, welcome, guys. Thanks for joining us this morning. Everybody waiting in the lobby. Thousands of people will be watching this later. I'm joined this morning by a New Zealand all-time great, Mr. Rod Dixon. Thanks ever so much, Rod, for joining us. Olympic bronze medalist, Munich 1972, New York City Marathon. What's that behind you on the right-hand side, Rod? I can see a picture over your right shoulder.
Yes, that's a limited edition painting, and I can tell you all about that if you want me to.
We'll come to that in a bit. Yeah, go on
Yeah,
then. Tell us where you are at the moment, Rod, and also how you're coping with lockdown.
yeah. Well, this is this is the best lockdown I've ever had in my life. I'm at the Maori Hau, which is at the Abel Tasman National Park, and that's in
Yes.
Nelson, New Zealand. And I've got these fabulous friends who said when we're getting close to the the lockdowns levels 3, 4, they said you should go over to the beach and just hang there until this sorts itself out. Well, of course, now I've got squatters' rights. I'm not leaving. This is going to be where I'm going to stay forever. And I've already changed the address. They'll never be able to find the house.
Yeah, and are you getting any running in yourself at the moment? Are you exercising?
Yep. I went down to the beach today, and at low tide, it's a huge, very, very tidal, and I had about 45 minutes of running barefoot in the sand, the only person on the beach. Just unbelievable. Yesterday, I had about 3 hours mountain biking all through the Kaiteri Forest and the trails and the mountain bike park, which is got some amazing technical trails and just absolutely. This has just been absolutely fantastic.
That's great to hear. And just for everybody that's logging on in the thread, really, just to let you know, this is a Q&A session. I'll lead the interview with Rod, but I want to keep it as informal as possible. So please, as Spencer Duval, who's kindly arranged all this, is suggesting, pop your question in the thread and we'll answer it as soon as it comes up. I'd rather do that than wait till the end of any formal interview. So it's your session, not our session. Please pop Rod a question in the thread. So let's go back to where it all started, my friend. How did you get into athletics?
Well, the thing is,
why wasn't it me?
it was probably how did I get into running? And it was at 4 years old, I ran away from home and went to my brother's school. And the school called my mother and said, "Now, where's young Rodney?" And my mother said, "Oh, no, he's out in the sandpit playing." She said, "No, he's down here at the school 2.5 miles away. He's come to see his brother." So my mother knew I was on the move. But, it was obviously we ran to school. We delivered newspapers. We ran to the beach. We swam. We were active kids. And, I played cricket. I got knocked out. I played rugby and got concussed. I played soccer, but I never got the ball because I was on the wing. But when I joined cross country or track, the 100 meters, I was a 100-meter champion or 100-yard champion those days at Tahuna Nui School. And it wasn't long before I went to middle school that when they had a running club that I joined that. And then, of course, the Nelson Amateur Athletic Harrier and Cycling Club formed in 1896. And 500 or 600 members, and of course, they ran at the beach, they ran across country, they ran on the roads, they ran on the parks, they ran on the farmland, and that was just fabulous for me because I was just on the move. So I joined the run club mainly because all my mates were. We loved to run, and then slowly but surely it just started to evolve, and I had a little success when I was younger, but not a lot. And it really didn't start coming through till I was about 17, 18. And that's when we realized, whoa, this kid's, I ran 4.6 for the mile at 18. And that was pretty important, pretty impressive in those days, because I think the New Zealand record was 4 minutes 6.8. So very close to setting the New Zealand record. Then I won the New Zealand Mile Championships. And then at 19, or just I turned 20, I I ran the cross country and came away to the World Cross Country Championships in 1971. So it all began.
Fantastic. I can already see we've got one or two questions coming in, Rod, about specific training. Can you talk a little bit? I mean, we will get more into this, but can you talk a little bit about your mental approach to training as you stepped up from the 1500 meters, an Olympic bronze medalist, to becoming a big city marathon winner? And that's from Barnaby Foot. It's more the mental side of things.
Oh, Barnaby. What it was really about was that, I joined the running club and we would run, cross country. We were running I was not a 1500 meter runner. In fact, after going to the World Cross Country in 71, there was talk that he should try, not Rod Dixon, he should try for the steeplechase or the 5,000 meters. And you see, at that point, I hadn't even broken the 4-minute mile. I hadn't won national championships in the 1500. But my brother John said to me, well, what do you want to run? And I said, the history of Jack Lovelock in 1936 and Snell and Halberg and all our legends of running. And I said, I would like to run and Bannister, I'd like to run the 1500 meters. And John said, well, that's fine, because now you turn up for training every day because you've committed yourself in that heart of yours. And of course, we were questioned by the authorities by, why would Dixon try and be a 1500 meter runner? He's done nothing. But you see, slowly but surely that year, 71, I broke the 4-minute mile. I won the regional championships, the national championships. I was second in the national championships, and I won the Olympic trial and qualified for the Olympics. And so, that 4 or 5 weeks later, they announced the team. Tony Polhill and Rod Dixon would be running the 1500. So suddenly I was a 1500 meter runner. But really, all the background was, was that endurance, aerobic training that I'd done all those years. But you see, my thing is, I came, into the mile with a strength background. I got my speed from my strength. A lot of the runners I was running against got their strength from their speed. And so I found I had more stamina with that long aerobic base than a lot of the other runners I was running against. Most effective session when training for the... I think, it's interesting. That's a very good question, James, because my most effective session was to run a 2-mile, have 10-minute break, to run a mile and have a 5-minute break, and run 800 meters and have a 2.5-minute break. And that was probably the defining workout to see where we were, whether we had to do more aerobic, long distance, or whether we had to do more hill training and more track training. And that would show us very, very quickly where my weakness was. And most of the time we got it pretty right.
Fantastic. Before we take the next question that Spencer will be preparing, I have to flag up Mr. James T is the gentleman I mentioned yesterday, Rod, about this infamous quote of yours, which we spoke about and you laughed about. Now, you tell me the quote, because I don't want to misquote you.
Well, I think
drinking beer.
Yeah. Well, I remember, we were all been asked, what was our defining quote or anything else. And I said, I just want to train like an animal and drink lots of beer.
And I think nowadays people turn it around and get the beer bit in first. Have I got that right?
I read where, all I want to do is drink beer and train like an animal. But it was actually around the other way. I want to train like an animal and drink lots of beer.
Drink beer. So you've actually got, that's it. Train like an animal and drink lots of beer. So that's two questions you've got for James T there. Have we got another question, Spencer? How much of your success was down to the amount of jogging you did? This comes from a very good friend of mine who's an excellent ultra distance runner, a guy called Andy Brooks, based in the Midlands. You want to take that one, Rod?
Yeah, I think the success was based on, if people know about the Lydiard principles of training, and the philosophy of his idea was the pyramid of training. And so the bottom of the pyramid was your base foundation, and then as you moved up the pyramid, you started doing your intensity work, hill training, track training, your anaerobic training, and then finally you come to your racing. So that's that. So the most important base of anything, any foundation, anything we do is that slow jogging, and that jogging was often a minute and a half to 2 minutes slower than race pace. In fact, our simple thing was the talk test. If you could carry on a conversation, you were running within your aerobic ability. If you were huffing and puffing, you were training too hard. And remember, Andy, remember this: you don't improve when you train, you improve when you recover. And that was our philosophy. So, we didn't have the telemetry to be testing ourselves every day to find out where our lactic acid and our lactate was. We just figured out, take your resting pulse rate in the morning, and if it was elevated by more than 10%, you'd trained too much the day before. You hadn't recovered. So you'd go for another jog, and sure enough, the next day you had recovered yourself. So it was not 2 days of anaerobic training in a row. You did your jogging in between to free up the lactate. I mean, we did things like hot baths with Epsom salts, massage, yoga, but eating correctly, eating well, eating organic, eating simple, and all that was all part of the recovery.
Fantastic. I hope that's answered your question, Andy. We've got Igor to run. Lydiard encouraged runners and coaches to create their own systems. What did you specifically create for yourself in light of Lydiard's initial system? I guess this is a question about how much you deviated from Lydiard whilst retaining faith to his foundational principles. Can you answer that one, Rod?
Well, now that's very interesting, because Lydiard actually used to travel around the country visiting clubs and coaching the coaches. Now, and when he was coming around, my brother being 3 and a bit years older, he was fascinated by this. And also too, he was coached by George Mackenzie, who was the brother of Dave Mackenzie, who in 1967 won the Boston Marathon. And so, they had understood the Lydiard principles and philosophy. My brother came in and started to learn coaching, and then we applied those principles and philosophy to the environment that we were living in. You see, we didn't live, our environment and our training terrain was not like that of Auckland. And so therefore we knew that when we would do a mountain run here, it was far tougher than what they didn't have those mountains in Auckland. They had hills, but not mountains. And so we had to figure out doing our training. And that's where the national parks were brilliant, because the tracks were walking tracks, and we would do a lot of our running in those. But we would often run up Mount Robert, which was, nearly 3,000 feet, Mount Robert. So we were able to understand the principles, but then apply those to our training based on recovery. And so we started to, my grandfather, he said, the most important 3 words in your life will be learn by doing. And so that's where we learned by what we were doing, and we would record that. We would write our training in a diary. I've still got not hundreds, but I've still got about 30 diaries. And each day you wrote in what you did, how long, and then your thoughts and feelings. How did I feel? Did it feel tough? Was I stressed? And you see, after a couple of weeks, John, my brother, he would take that diary and put it on. In those days, it was a blackboard, but he'd write it up on the blackboard and under headings, and we would stand back and he'd say, "Now look, you've got 6 under heading 1, you've only got 2 under heading 2, you've got 7 under the heading 3. So what are we looking at for level 2? You're not doing enough jogging. You're doing, and I know, like Monday and Wednesday last week, you ran with your mates, didn't you? And what happens when you run with your mates? You race each other. So, he figured all this out just by reading my diary.
That's fantastic. Yeah, Richard Newbold. Why did New Zealand athletes stop following a training philosophy that has worked so well? Do you think there's been a decline in people following Lydiard, or is that what we're getting at? I'm not sure where Richard's coming from there. Any thoughts on that, Rod?
No, I think Richard, that's interesting. We haven't stopped following. We've just, I feel the coaches have actually trying to find a shortcut. And to me, shortcuts are dead ends. They never work out. My thing is that you've got to do that 16 to 18 week base training. And a lot of athletes are under incredible pressure to be running 3 seasons in 1 year, to do this, to do that, and so therefore they don't go into isolation and do the training because, social media, I won't be able to be on social media for 10 weeks. There's nothing to talk about. So there's a lot of pressure for athletes to shorten that pyramid, and so they're getting molehills. They're not getting pyramids anymore. And so the athletes that come back to doing that foundation training are the ones that really, and it was interesting because I was talking to Cameron Brown, who is probably our most incredible triathlete Ironman, and he said that every year he goes into isolation and does that foundation training. And I absolutely agree with him. You've got to do that base training.
Excellent. I can see Roland Gibbard's got a very good question about the New York Marathon. We'll come to that in a minute because I think Spencer might be able to play one of your probably most famous victory in a moment, Rod. But before we do that, Joe McColgan, what do you think should be the focus with teenage runners? Take us back to your teenage years then, Rod, which you've spoken a little bit about, with building stamina, focus, multi-sports ethos. Where are you coming from?
Yeah, I think, the first thing that I know that John emphasized was having fun. And he said, go out and have fun with your mates. Don't race them. If you see a passion fruit vine, climb up and eat some passion fruit. Or if you go through an orchard, grab an apple. Don't take this so seriously. Just have fun doing it and lay the foundation. It's not going to happen in 2 years or 3. It could take 5 years. And in fact, in my case, I joined the run club when I was 12, and it was 5 years before I started. So I laid that foundation of training and having fun. And wonderfully, we would have reverse grid type races where first started last, and you got to win a few races if you knew when they were coming up. So it really was. Don't put the emphasis on young athletes and certainly teenage athletes to be performing every time they go out. And sometimes my brother would get me, and sure, they wanted me to run the 2 mile, but John said, no, he wants to run the relay, the 4x400 relay. And I got so excited to make the 4x400 meter relay team. And in fact, I think there was about a 6 or 7 year stint where I made the club 4x400, and that was so thrilling. I still ran the steeplechase, I still ran there, but so it just took my mind away from the intensity of running that event that you were meant to run, and that's why I think I became very from the half marathon, from the 800 meters up, I was fascinated by every event, and that really took my focus away from being just only a 1500 meter runner.
Fantastic answer. Just before we look back at your win on video, I hope. Yeah, another question from a Derby-based athlete, very good athlete, Lee Page. Hi, Rod. Who helped you with your transition then from being a world-class track runner to being a marathon runner?
Well, actually, very good question, Lee, because it was, I was running track, 72 Olympics. 76 was, of course, devastating for me because I was within a second of winning the gold and finished fourth, and it's a pretty tough position. And then went on. We had Commonwealth Games in between, but then I really focused on 1980, the Olympic Games, and of course we boycotted. New Zealand boycotted, and I was devastated. I said I wanted to, I ran some incredibly good times in 70 and 79. I came back here, won the New Zealand cross country, and we were really on a good training that I was going to have, probably going to be at the best at 30 years old at the 5,000, 10,000 from Moscow. We got boycotted, and I was so angry. I was so disappointed. But you see, we were in Philadelphia at the time when the boycott came on, and the manager coach said, we're going to go on to Europe and run in Scandinavia and Europe, but we just won't be going to the Olympics. And I said, no, I'm angry at my country. I'm angry at my Prime Minister doing this. He has no right to take our sport away from us. So there was a 10K road race in Philadelphia that weekend, and Bill Rogers was coming to run it, and he was going to be the spokesperson. And I said to a friend, I said, I'm going to stay another week, go and run this road race, and then I'll figure out what I'm going to do. Well, I went down, I finished third, 5,000 people. Everybody thought I was marvelous, and I thought, whoa, this is kind of cool. I like this. I think I can do this pretty well. I then stayed with my friend another couple of weeks, and I won another couple of races, and then away I went. And I got dialed into these 10K road races, and then I ended up renting an apartment, and my family came over. And then I said, right, this is going to be my journey now, that I'm going to be running road races, and they were every weekend. And so I started picking out races, and I remember when Brooks said, well, Adidas weren't that happy about me running road races. They wanted me on the track. I said, no, I'm done with track. They said, well, we're not going to support you on the road. Brooks said, well, we're not going to pay you anything, but we're going to give you an incentive that every race you win, we'll give you a bonus. And so that was A, B, C, and D races. So the A were the elite, the B were, regional, C was club, and D was fun runs. And so I then planned my year around all these races, and I would run at least 3 A races a month and 2 or 3 B, and maybe if I can run Saturday, Sunday. And of course, at the end of it, Brooks, by the time they totaled it up, I said, I only wanted $25,000, but I've worked it out that you owe me $37,000.
Oh, fantastic. On that note, I've got very good questions coming in from Keith Braxton and Andy Brooks again. We're just going to cut back to Spencer, are we? Yeah, let's have a little bit of all our yesteryears. This is the 1983 New York City Marathon. Here we go.
Marathon was the race which I felt was going to define what my career was about. I had trained the best I'd ever trained. As I left my training grounds, I went to New York knowing that I was prepared to live with the consequence of my performance. The race started out as any other race did. When you're on the start line, you've got to reflect very quickly, in a thousandth of a second, a reflection on what you have done to get here. And I had every right to expect the best performance of my life. I trained like I'd never done before. Within 5 miles, I was starting to settle in comfortably. At 10 miles, I started to feel, I've got another 16 miles of this. So you go through a bit of a roller coaster of emotions, of feelings, of sometimes confidence, sometimes a little doubt. At this stage, the leaders are starting to get away from me. I knew I had my time scripts on my fingers. I knew that as I made each 5 mile mark, that I was right on my predicted time. I was running to my plan. The most important thing with the marathon, with any race, is to run your plan, not somebody else's. You've got to be a winner of your race on your plan. By 15 mile, I was starting to settle into a good rhythm, but the leaders were well ahead of me. At 20 miles, I knew the final 10K was the most important 10K, still 2.5 minutes behind the leaders. But knowing that I was right on track to run the time of my life, I then got to 23 miles and did the math and realized I was actually going to run out of real estate trying to catch him. What I had to do, I couldn't run any faster. I had to believe that he would slow down. He would give me time. I knew that he was running in the center of the road. I had to run the tangents, and it wasn't a matter that I was going to run faster. It was meaning that I was not having to run the distance. And each corner that I saved 1 or 2 yards, timed by 40 corners, I suddenly had the 80 or 90 meters that I was short in time.
He's got determination on his face. He's going for it.
We may see the greatest finish in the history of marathoning. Here comes Dixon.
As we got up to Columbus Circle and close to the 26 mile, I was now the hunter. He was the hunted. He was looking back. I was focused on him.
Here comes Dixon. He's very, very close.
They're even. They're basically even now, and Dixon's going to the arms, which he's been considering.
At 26 miles, I went past him. I ran as fast as I could past him so that it would devastate him and he wouldn't want to try and catch me.
In the final minute of the race, Smith trying to come back.
The last 385 yards, I was running scared. I looked back a couple of times. I knew that the finish line was just up the road. The race wasn't run until I crossed that finish line. I came around the corner. I saw the finish line. I ran, and I ran, and I won.
There it is. Rod Dixon has won the New York City Marathon. Look at his knees. His eyes to the heavens. What a great race.
Wow. I hope that answers your question, Roland. That's coming from a very good, an international marathon runner himself, Roland Gibbard. I think he was a 2:20 man for the marathon. And what are your thoughts? I'm not sure when that little bit of footage was filmed, Rod, but I like the tank top anyway, as we say. But any further reflections on that wonderful race? It was a great race.
Well, it's amazing, what? Because, well, 20, 40, 30, 37 years ago. And it, of course, you know, I see that the videos had about 600,000 views, and probably 500,000 of those are mine. But, you know, it really is. It was, as I said, it was the defining moment of my life. And I think, you know, when I worked through with my brother John, and I said to him in '82, that of course I set the world record for the half marathon. And then I went on, and of course Fred Lebow and you know, marathons all around the world. Boston, I didn't like Boston. Boston was not going to be a course for me. London, yes, I thought about London, running London, but I had a lot to do with the New York City, and you know, Pan Am were one of my sponsors. They were New York. Pepsi Cola, they supported me all those road races over the years, and Saucony, of course, they wanted me to be involved on a marathon, either New York or Boston. So I remember Fred Lebow took me around the course at about 5:30 on a Sunday morning once, and I looked at the course, and the more I looked at it, and then I ran a few sections, and I know this is my course. So all that started to plan, but it wasn't until late '82 that I made a commitment to run New York, and then I spent most of '83 very, very focused and planned on it. Probably the first time in my life that I'd actually been disciplined and had a program and had a plan, and as the plan unfolded, and training rather than racing, and it just started to build that pyramid again for me. And I realized that I'm on to something that I haven't really experienced for many, many, many years.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that with us. Yeah, Spencer's reminding us of your times there. A 62-minute half marathon, and 1983 you ran 2:8:59. Yeah, before, I think Keith Braxton had a good question that Spencer might be able to get up for us in a moment. Just tell us, Rod, about that picture in the background. You did want to tell us about that painting in the background before we take Keith's question.
Yeah, well, sorry, one more time.
Yeah, just the picture in the background. Tell us about it. That's it.
Yeah, well, that's when I crossed. Really, when I passed Jeff at 26 miles, and I thought, wow, this is incredible. Now I'm leading what, 35,000 runners from Verrazano Bridge, and I'm the very first person to get here. And I mean, I led the race for 385 yards, but it was just a roller coaster of everything that I went through. And when I crossed the line, I mean, I first of all, I went down on my hands and knees and kissed the ground, and then up and thanked the heavens, because it really it defined who I was. Of all the disappointments I'd had, and I'd had some great moments, but there was disappointments of 76 and the boycott of 80, and I got it all together, and it was just incredible to think the journey really started when I was 12. And here I am at 33 years old, running the race of my life that defined who I was. And that's been incredible, because it really has been the cornerstone of everything I'm doing. And you'll see just up and behind me here, my kids' marathon program of 26.2. And the kids go on to that video and they see what it takes to train. Yeah. And they do it in school, and it takes them 10 to 12 weeks for some of the kids. Sometimes we get the older kids, they do the daily mile, but some of the smaller kids, they try and get half a mile in 3 or 4 times a week. And so they want to be like Rod Dixon and finish the marathon, because my mantra is finishing is winning, winning is finishing, the hare and the tortoise. And you see on my shirt here, this one here is the tortoise, and the kids relate to that because they all know the story of the hare and the tortoise, and so they love to think that they get a replica of my Olympic medal when they do their marathon. Yeah.
Just say a little bit more before we take David's question and maybe Keith's question. Just say a little bit more about this wonderful work that you do that I'm well aware of, and how can we support you in that, Rod? How can we donate and support your effort?
Oh, yeah, but obviously at the moment I'm not in the United States. Boston was cancelled, and most of the marathons are cancelled, and even in fact, they postponed it, but now they've cancelled it for September. London was cancelled, of course. And I'm not able to do a lot of my events that I normally do, which helps me to raise funds for the kids. And all my schools, and I'll tell you, all my schools, inner city, low-income schools, programs, and where I find that most of the schools I'm in, when they get budgets cut, their budgets are cut with art, music, and PE. And it's wrong, because kids were born to move. And so that's been my focus. And I can tell you tonight that when I look at what's going on in the United States, I've seen this going on in the United States, in the poorer areas and the low economic areas, and the underserved communities. And these kids, don't get opportunities. And most of those schools that I work with are 80% African American. And then in the Inland Empire, they're Hispanic kids. And these kids don't get the chance to participate in sports and recreation. They and some of them, 60% of some of my LA schools in Crenshaw and the South LA come to school hungry. It's just, so I saw all this going on over the last 5-6 years, where these underserved communities have had enough of it. They believe that they are entitled to more. And I think a lot of the anger is this coming out, the frustration that they don't get support. And yet they can put a man on the moon 10 times, and they can, people like Bill Gates builds $1 billion yacht. What the hell's that for? I don't know.
So how can people support you, Rod? Can you give us a website address?
Yeah. It's www.kidsmarathonfoundation.org. And there's a donate button there, and if you're going to do something, it'd be fabulous. We're going to this year, because of what's happened with COVID-19. We're going to do some virtual runs. Some of the schools are doing them now. We've got a lot of the school kids. You see, I gave ownership of this program back to the PTA, the schools, and the parents, and they've continued the program while there's lockdown. So the kids have been doing 26 times around the table, or 26 times around the house, or 26 good deeds, or 26 paintings, or and the kids are doing it, and they're doing their virtual final mile with their parents in the street or a local park. So they've carried on doing it, even though the schools are closed down. The power is in the community. The power is in the people. And that's where, I know that this program is very, very successful. And I'll tell you that I've been working with the USA City Games as part of our program towards 2028 Los Angeles Olympics. And I go to high schools, and kids come up to me in high school. These are 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. And they're saying to me, "Hey, Rod Dixon, here's my medal I got from your program 10 years ago."
Oh, that's great.
And I said, they're not all running. They're playing soccer, or they're playing lacrosse, or they're playing football or something. But the fact is that they were inspired because finishing is winning, winning is finishing. The hare and the tortoise, they are a champion. If you do the training, do your final mile, you're going to get the same medal as the person. There's no such thing as a winner. They're all winners. It's not first, second, third, I should say. It's all the kids get their medal, T-shirt, and I'm going to hold up this little. They get a training guide, they get a booklet that they can, and it all is inside it. And of course, who's featured. Here's the tortoise, but it's just and all the pictures of all the kids, having fun, and it's very, very inspiring, and it's a very limited funding program. I don't get national funding from the government or anything like that. It's all through donations and all that. And really, we can do this program per kid for about $7, and we call that a scholarship. And we say, some people say, I'll give you 100 scholarships, or I'll give you 200, and that's fantastic, because that's what's going to help these inner city, underserved communities get the kids moving. And one day, one of those kids are going to go to the Olympics. I mean, we do see them in other sports, but I'm very excited.
That's great, and thank you for Spencer for putting that in the thread. He's actually plugged your foundation so everyone can see that.
Thank you.
The Kids Marathon Foundation. Yeah. Keith Braxton had a very good question. I know this is something that you wanted to talk about specifically yourself, Rod. It takes us back to the 1970s, I get. And Keith has said, I think Keith is doing an excellent job as Midlands team manager at the minute. You, Dick Quacks and John Walker used to tour Europe and race. How did you maintain your performances whilst travelling and racing? Yeah, tell us about that era. Yeah. Tell us about Sir John Walker and the late, great Dick Quacks as well, who took silver, I think, in 1976, wasn't it?
76, yeah. And he took silver in the 70 Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh behind Kip Keino. And that was a huge boost to our sport in 1970. And it inspired us all to believe that, if Dick would do it. And then Tony Polhill won the British 3A's championship, the mile, in 71. So that was big for us Kiwis to be able to go over and knock off the Palms.
I noticed you were having a little bit of banter with Steve Jones, who won the London Marathon in 1985 yesterday.
Yeah, Jones and I love him, and if I can give him a ribbing, I do, and he gives me a ribbing. It's just incredible. And our time we've shared on the road racing, and we still go to meets and we still do clinics together. And he's just such a good man. He's such a good, powerful man. I love him.
Yeah. And how about people like Brendan Foster? You raced against Brendan Foster in '72, Dave Bedford. Tell us some stories about those characters, because people will love to hear that.
Well, they were incredible, and go back to that question, that what we realized, that we were sometimes running 3 races a week, so you didn't have to go to the track. So what you do is you go out and do light training, light jogging. Preferably, we had opportunity to run in the forest or on the golf courses or on the parks. I used to love running in Wimbledon, in Richmond Park and Wimbledon Common, and then of course we now and again we stayed out there in Crystal Palace, and so but we realized that we just had to go out and just run, jog. But now and again on a football field we'd do diagonals of stride outs. I was very, very much into my plyometrics and I was always fascinated with the sprinters. Here they were running 100 meters, and yet they would train for 2 hours, And so I used to watch Don Quarry and Steve Williams and Alan Wells, all those guys, and how they were so methodical in their training. And I adopted a lot of that. John Walker wasn't quite into. He didn't like a lot of the yoga stuff I was doing. But so the racing we did was our speed work, and then was to recover from that. And of course, in those days, we still had to travel to the next place and have a light run in the park or wherever. There again, I think so. It really you didn't try. Sometimes we noticed are starting to go off pace. So we would go down to the Adidas Sport Hotel in Hirschenau in Germany and have a 2-week training, and we wonderfully went to Asiago in Italy with the Italian Federation and had 2 weeks training there 1 year. And that really set us so that we could then go back to racing. So you've got to have that time out, you've got to have that recovery, and then you're racing. So we made sure, I tried to run 1,500, 3,000 meters and some 5,000 meters, but I would try and do those 3K, 5K, 1,500s. In fact, the Italians let me run an 800 1 year, and I ran 1:47.6. It was incredible. Wow. So I knew all the base was there. The key was just to make sure you were balancing it with all your travel. Sometimes you eat something and you got a bit dally belly, a bit crook. But most of the time we had a good balance of training and racing and recovery.
Yeah, and a great question from a good friend of mine, an up-and-coming coach, Mike Stevens here. Yeah, if you're running competitively now, what, if anything, would you do differently? I mean, you mentioned yoga and things like that. That would be quite pioneering back in the 70s and the 80s, I suppose. But what would you do differently now? What are the benefits of what you would know now?
I do follow Nick Willis, our 1,500 meter double Olympic. His drills and he is focused on, and I think that's of course, in those early years I had a job, I had to work, and so I put on until about 73 to 74 grand up and support from my communities, the sponsors, to allow me to be a full-time athlete. Today, I would certainly be a lot more involved with a lot of the exercise physiologists and understanding full range of motion and understanding the full training and how to, they would do the testing. And that would be something that I would certainly be focused on now, of just getting efficiency and doing drills. I worked a bit of time with a great friend of mine, Kerry Hill, who is a sprint coach, and very good. It was quite interesting because Walker saw me working out one day and said, "What on earth are you doing? There's some good skills to learn." And he said, "Come on, let's just go for a 5-mile run." But I said, "No, John, I'm going to learn what these people are doing." So it was very important to do that, because as it was those 3 favorite words of mine: learn by doing.
Excellent, fantastic. Just as Spencer gets us another question, we have another question. Derek Donnell, you mentioned yoga. How much S&C work did you do, and how did this differ when doing a 1500 compared to the marathon? Did you do more of it as your distance increased, less of it?
No, in fact, if anything, you see, in the 70s, yoga, there was a bit of a question mark when you go into yoga, but when I got to road racing in the United States, and there were trainers at the local gym, and there was yoga classes, and I particularly like Kundalini yoga because that was always the power of the breath. But I would go to some of the other. In fact, I was doing some ballet yoga, and man, I could not do half of that stuff when I started. But I started to get better, and I learned the full range of motions, and that your hip area, your glutes, are the most powerful muscles of your body, and that maintains posture, it maintains strength, it maintains the way you lift your legs. And I really started to get a lot of benefit out of working and doing those exercises that strengthened and stretched those muscles, and also too a good Finnish Swedish massage, which it's sometimes quite not aggressive, but certainly stripping the muscle. And then of course but you didn't race during that period because it took 2 or 3 days for the muscle to recover. That's why saunas were very, very good for recovery. Cold plunge, ice baths, they were all things that we did. And nowadays you've got these boots that you put on, and compression, and a lot of that we didn't quite understand, but I would certainly do a lot more of that now to drain the muscle of or the muscles of lactate. And that was the big thing, getting rid of that lactate or lactic acid.
Getting rid of the lactate, yeah. We talked about the golden era of the 70s before we come on to Graham Moffat's question about steeplechase. We've talked about the golden era of the 70s. What did you ever encounter Steve Ovett and Sebco? I mean, you had a wonderful tradition in New Zealand, but I'm getting one in for the Ponds here, as you call us. We had our own tradition with Steve Ovett, Sebco. Go on, tell us a few stories.
Absolutely, that was amazing. Well, in fact, you see, I met Seb in 74, and we ran in Gateshead, and we jumped on the bus together, and here was this young guy, and I said, "You're Sebastian Coe, aren't you?" "Yes, I am." And we chatted away, and I said, "Now, what race are you running tonight?" And he said, "The 1500. And I go, "Whoops, that's my race too." So I said, "Oh, this is great." But what was amazing is that, Seb would go out and give it a go, and we'd catch him in the last lap, and then slowly but surely we weren't catching him till the last turn, and then the next race we never caught him. So it was amazing. But I still remember, because in 1976, after the disappointed Montreal, I ran the British 1500, the 3 A's, and Moorcroft, Frank Clement, and who else was in the race? John Kirkbride, and Sebastian. Sebastian was in the race, and I have that photograph. And I actually couldn't find it today, but I've got this photograph of Moorcroft was second, Frank was third, and Sebastian was fourth. And I send that picture to him just to remind him of the whooping I gave him.
That's a fantastic story. Thanks for sharing that with us. Yeah, Graham Moffat, a great masters athlete here. You mentioned steeplechase earlier. Did you ever run one? I think you said you did as a junior, didn't you? And how did it go, and how did it benefit you?
Well, it was interesting. I called it steeplechase when we were in Nelson at the club, but we had to jump into the long jump pit. We didn't have a water jump. But here it is. And
8:29, Spencer's saying.
Yeah, and look at the date, 1973, and the world record was about 8:23 or 8:24 at that time. So I was only 5 seconds off the world record. But I was in Oslo, and Arnie Halkvik, who did the Oslo Bislett Games, and he said, "We want you to run the 5,000 meters tomorrow." And I said, "Oh, I don't want to run the 5,000." He said, "Well, you have to run something because you want to stay for 2 more weeks." And I go, "Oh, gee." So I looked at the program. I said, "I'll run the steeplechase." And he said, "Have you ever run one before?" And I said, "Yes." And I hadn't. I'd never run one before. And so, Malinowski and all these great Yarderud from Sweden, all these great steeplechases. So, of course, we take off, and I'm fine until the first hurdle, and then I go, "Oops." So I had to put my hand on it to go over. And then slowly but surely, I started to get into my rhythm. The first time I went over the water jump, I actually stalled at the top, and then I had to jump both feet into the water. But slowly but surely, I adapted, and I started to, the last 3 laps, I really came on them. And I came from about 6th or 7th in the race to 4th, I think it was. So at 8:29. And that day, I broke the New Zealand record, and that record was held by Peter Welsh, who was the Commonwealth champion in 1965. Yeah.
Fantastic, and thanks for sharing that PB, Spencer. But you'll have impressed Spencer there. I think it was the Atlanta Olympics he ran in as a chaser. Simon Taylor, very good writer for the British Milers Club here. What was your favourite shoe for racing, and what do you wear to run in now? I think Simon's got a vested interest in this. I must warn you about this.
Okay.
Carry on.
My thing was, growing up, of course, Adidas was it. And I remember I had to do a newspaper round and a milk delivery round on a Saturday, Sunday to buy. And that I saved 3 weeks to buy my first pair of Adidas shoes. So that was big. It was huge. And so, of course, in 1971, World Cross Country, I wore the Adidas, and John Bolter, the English 800 and 1500 meter runner who worked for Adidas, he came to me in 72 before the Olympics and said, "We see what you've done to your shoes." And I used to get my Adidas shoes and hand make by putting a wedge in them. And so that you had normally it was a negative, what we call a negative drop, but I like to have a 6-7 millimeter heel just to protect the heel strike. And so they helped me make some new shoes, and mine were leather in those days, but they made them out of nylon, and those are the shoes I wore in the Olympics. And then, of course, when I went to Adidas in 73 and met Mr. Daslow, we went to the Sport Hotel, and in the morning you were invited for a cup of tea or cup of coffee, and but you had to bring your shoes. So I went over and I took my shoes, and he immediately took my shoes, and I carried on the conversation with the other people. But he was fascinated what I had done with the shoes with a shoemaker in New Zealand, and we'd taken his sole out and we'd done things to it and we'd changed things around. And he was fascinated why I would do this, and the heel tab, because I didn't have an insert, and so the heel tab became higher up into the tendon, so we put a V in it to give the tendon more movement without restriction. And he was fascinated by all this, and then they started hand making shoes for me to what I wanted. And boy, oh boy, we got very, very specific on that. But by the time I went to road racing, what happened was that Adidas weren't going to support me. So I took all my shoes to Saucony, and I showed them, this is how I want you to make shoes. Well, they didn't have an R&D. They didn't have a research development program. He said, well, you're going to have to do it yourself. But that was okay, because I went up to the girls in the pattern room And I said, I want you to take these shoes and take all the stitches out and lay them out and make a pattern from those. And then I went down to the EVA, and I went into the storeroom, and I got big sheets of EVA, and I put this, what they call a shore durometer on it to get this hardness, and it had to be between 32 and 35 durometer. And I would put my name on that sheet and put it to the side. And then I said, this is, and my great friend Kevin Ryan worked for New Balance, and I called him and I said, will you get me some of those Vibram soles? We don't have them, Saucony don't have them. And so he would get a plain box and send them to me, and then I'd play around with them, and sometimes I'd put them through the splitter so that I would cut them right down so that it was only a 2 or 3 millimeter outsole. And we played around with that, and we made the shoes. And so the shoes that I wore pretty well, all my road racing, were handmade by me and the team at Saucony. And I'm still with Saucony to this day. Yeah, they still support my program, and I still wear their shoes. And that's, that's nearly 40 years, 38 years. Wow. Yeah, amazing.
I just can't imagine Kipchoge having to do that. Yeah. Here's another one from Mike Stevens again. Yeah, Rod, your thoughts on the value of tempo and interval sessions in a training plan for a runner new to marathons? You know, what sort of did you do tempo work? I know we've spoken about your out and back running.
Tempo runs, out and back. A lot of the tempo runs were out and back. So we'd run out a mile, come back a mile, out 2 mile, back 2 mile, so that and so you would have the markers on the road. So you had the mile mark, you turned around at the 2 mile, then you came back to that mile. So that was your 3rd mile and 4th. And so you would go set off at quarter pace, and then you'd pick it up to half pace, and then you drop it back to quarter pace, and then you pick it up to half and 3/4, and then variations of going out fast, and then you're going out 3/4 pace, and then coming back at half pace. How can you hold on to that tempo once you've set that tempo? Can you hold and maintain it? So there was a lot of that. So tempo runs are very, very important. And what was the other one there? Tempo and pace.
The other one was intervals, yeah. Tempo and intervals.
Yeah. So intervals, there again, we learned intervals on the track, but I didn't do a lot of track training once I started road racing. I would do those intervals there again on the road. And so basically just adapting what we did, 6 times 800, but it would be on the road rather than pushing the turns all the time. In fact, even younger, John, if I had to do 400s and say do 15 of them, I would do 5 clockwise, 5 anti-clockwise, 5 clockwise. So getting the left leg to work as much as the right. It was all about that. I don't know very rarely I ask some of these top runners, what can you do a mile clockwise? I mean, anti-clockwise, which is normally race, and what can you do it clockwise? And they go, I've never done it. I go, wow, I used to do a lot of that training, 800 anti-clockwise, and then the next session would be clockwise. And I could run a mile within 4 seconds either way, either left or right. And that was the big difference that I found. I had better balance and coordination than a lot of the runners, because you pushing that turn all the time to the left, you're going to put that extra strain on your right leg all the time. So I would switch around and do a lot of my training each way, and also to a lot of the going down to the football field and doing diagonals. Run the baseline, sprint the diagonal. Run the baseline, sprint the diagonal, and do 5-6 minutes of that at 3/4 effort or quarter effort or full effort, and do 3 sets or 4 sets or whatever it was. So there was a lot of variation to that interval type training and tempo training, and that was very, very important. And it was good. It was exciting to be able to go down. Sometimes I would go down the golf course, and I had permission, and I'd run from the tee down to the green and run round the green, and then go over to the next tee and then sprint down to the next green. I wouldn't run on the green or I wouldn't run on the tee, but and I'd do a whole golf course sprinting the fairways. So and that was like fartlek. It was like, but I'd do that in bare feet, and that was, I used to love running in bare feet.
Yeah,
a lot of runners.
Thanks for sharing. Any other sessions that you would do? Any other key sessions Spencer's asking about? And let's link it back. Colin Lancaster quite rightly is asking, how does this link back to Lydiard? Let's not lose that link. Colin's right to point that out. So, any other key sessions?
Yeah, well, there against the base, the foundation was Lydiard, and then we, and so if you've got your cake, and then you want to put the icing on, we would. The Lydiard principles of philosophy was the cake. Then John and I, we would put the icing on, and we would adapt what we wanted to, respective to the Lydiard principles. Some of his training and some of his track work didn't quite work for us, so we adapted and we did things. And he said, Rod, you are much better doing this sort of training that you are going to the track all the time. And he, and so we adapted at the sports fields, or as I say, we when I started running on the golf course, we got kicked off, but when I started winning national championships, they let me back on again.
Fantastic. And I think when I had the privilege of interviewing you for AW, you were almost saying that your favourite out and back run was to your girlfriend's house. I'm sparing your blushes now. Can you tell us about that one?
Oh, well, yeah, she was gorgeous, and because she had always been doing her homework, and my brother John would say, what time are you going to train tonight? I'd say 4 o'clock. He goes, you always want to do that session at 4 o'clock, because I knew Julie would be doing her homework, and I could go past her house twice, out and back.
How old were you then?
About 14, 15, 16, yeah.
15, 16. Oh, that's a good story. Very good question coming in from Colin Lancaster, who's doing some fantastic work in this country for the Lydiard Foundation. Works you'll know of Colin. Yeah, and this also answers, I think, a question that Andy Brooks had about ultra running. Did you still follow the Lydiard training pyramid for your New York City Marathon training? And I guess Andy Brooks, who asked a similar question, can it apply to ultra running as well?
Yes.
Two for one question.
Yeah, so absolutely, I worked with John when I was back in New Zealand. So John said, if you're going to run New York and at the end of October of this year, of next year, 83, he said, I would suggest when you come back that the whole of the summer, you don't go and do any of these road races or anything. You just do your aerobic training. You just don't do any racing, but go out and do your tempo runs and go out and do your time trials and things in your outback. But you're not going to get into a competitive environment. You're just going to lay that foundation. So very much part of all I did, and even when I went back to the US and I was continued, I did some races in May. I won the Beta Breakers race. I won 2 or 3 other races, a 10-mile race, a 10K race, and a 7-mile. Those are very much part of all the plan towards New York. And then really from about July, no racing. But I would do time trials. And then I had this 3,000-meter time trial to do 2.5 weeks, or might have been, 2.5 weeks before New York. And it was going to be a 2-mile. So I called up John and I said, I want to run the mile. And he said, why is that? I said, I didn't know. I just, everything's gone so well. I've done everything so well. I want a treat. I just want to go out and run a mile. And he said, I love it. Go boy. So I went down to the high school track. 2 or 3 guys came down. Nobody led. I said, don't even call the lap times out. I'm going to run a mile just and put my mind and put myself back into what I was doing back in the 70s, which the Olympics and the 4-minute mile, all that sort of, they were very important and very powerful moments. And I said, I want to put all those moments together because this is really my last big effort before New York. And I got a feeling it was 2.5 weeks before. So I went out and off I go. And the guys are there, and you could see them looking at, and there was go boy, that was about it. And I finished off, and they ran over and says, do you want to see? I said, no, let me warm off, let me chill down. And then I said, you go back to the finish line. And I did my little jog off and did my strides. And then I came over, and they said, what time do you think you ran? I said, I would like to think that I ran 3:59. And he said, you ran 3:58.7.
Wow.
And that was a perfect, that was absolutely, I just punched the air and I said, that's it. Case closed. Everything's in the bag. Everything's in the suitcase for New York. That is I'm done. I am just, all I'm going to do now is jog on the golf course, jog in the forest, do my stuff. But there's no more training, because that is the icing on the cake. That is the candle on the top of the cake.
Fantastic.
3:58.7. And I was 33 years old. I just couldn't believe it.
Fantastic. And I hope that answers Colin's question and Andy Bucks' question. Yeah, how important was cross-country training to you? To tell us about your races. I know you've done some in the UK, I think you said yesterday. Tell us about cross-country and the value of that. Steve Fury.
Yeah, good question, Steve. But cross-country was absolutely what everything was about. I love cross-country. And the harder, the tougher, the more mud, the more creeks, the more barbed wire fences. I just loved all that stuff. I remember a 4-time New Zealand and Australian cross-country champion, Kerry Williams, was our club coach. And I remember we came up and he said, now when you run your cross-country, there's going to be a flag at the gate here, and then there's going to be a flag halfway up that fence line. But just look at it, because, in New Zealand we have barbed wire on the top of the fences, you see. And he said, so the safest way is to go over the gate. But he said, if you've got any balls, you boys, you jump over the barbed wire. But he said, you got to jump bloody high. You don't want anything catching on that barbed wire. And he said, I remember he said, cross country is and jumping fences and jumping creeks and jumping banks. He said 10% ability and 90% guts. So,
and Spencer's just reminded us, I think I'd forgotten, you actually won a bronze medal in 82. Where were those championships in 82? I forgot.
Actually, I finished third in 73 and third in 82. So,
where were they in 82? I can't think where they were. Can you remember where they were, Rod?
In Rome.
In Rome. Fantastic. And talking about bronze medals, we haven't yet spoken about your Olympic bronze. You've mentioned the disappointment of Montreal. Did you say you'd got something to share? As I know you're looking over your share with us. What's this? We don't get to see this every day. Can we have a close-up of that? Wow, that is the Olympic bronze medal that you won in Munich. Go on, tell us about that. I mean,
as I always say, Matt, that is the gold medal I won. But I liked it so much, I had it bronzed.
Remind us of that fantastic race. I think it was the Finn that won, wasn't it? Pekka Vasala.
Pekka Vasala, and I'm still, we still communicate. Pekka and his adorable wife Anya. We're still great friends. So and he won the gold, and Kip Keino was second, and I was third, and Mike Boyd was fourth. Brendan Foster was fifth.
Yes, so, I think Foster was the early leader. Tell us about that race, because wasn't it a slow start? Brendan was leading for a lap, and then it kicked off a little bit.
We'd see, and the interesting thing is that we ran 3 races in 3 days. So we had the heats, semi, and final all in each day, and that would really suited me. Because once again, and I remember I met Laszlo Tabori in the stands. And Laszlo Tabori was, of course, the third man to break the 4-minute mile, and the Hungarian who 1956 defected. And he was a great friend. But I remember in '72, we're sitting watching the 10,000 meters, just before the start, and we were all talking, and we were all guessing who was going to run. And of course, I said, I think Bedford's going to be the boy here, and somebody said Varian, and somebody said Puttermans, and anyway, so and somebody said, oh, of course, we've got the 1500-meter runner here, young Dixon from New Zealand. He's going to be, and I heard this voice go, who is this New Zealand? You get down here and sit beside me. And down it was Laszlo Tabori. And he said, how do you train? And I said, I have a love for cross country. I'm a strong runner. And he said, good boy, because 3 races in 3 days, it's about strength. It's not about speed. And so that was and you know, and I talked to him right up to his he passed away 2 years ago now, but very sad. But I loved Laszlo. He was a good man.
Absolutely.
So really, you know, getting through to that final, you know, I improved my time my best personal time, and we knew that Kino would allow the race to do what it was going to do for 2 laps, and then he was going to take control. And we knew, and that's how I trained, knowing with my brother. He said, that's what Kino is going to do. And sure enough, coming up to 800, Kino moved forward to run that 3rd lap, to run everybody off their feet. And really, if anything, that was you know, I just, the further we went, the better I felt. I remember I just felt this, you know, I didn't like a lot of these sit and kick sort of races. I liked that from you know, at the last 800 meters at around 150. And I think even at that time, my best time was 150, and we ran 150 for the last half.
And of course, you beat an all-time great for that bronze medal in Mike Voigt that you've mentioned.
Yes,
fantastic finish. And you've
Mike,
mentioned the you've mentioned the before we come to Pete Robbins has got a great question. We'll come to that. Before you've mentioned the disappointment of Montreal in '76, but I mean, I have to mention that 5,000. You were 4th, but I mean, it was one of the greatest races and last laps of all time. Just tell us, what was it like to be in that race? Talk us through that one.
It's, I mean, I must admit, and there again, my brother John, we sat and he said, you need to be in control at 300 meters. If there's a bunch of you with a lap to go, you need to be in control at 300 meters. And I was 2nd, and I felt I was in control. I felt I was in control. And we're going down the back straight, and I said, you know, I've raced Varian 3 or 4 times before this, and he's not going to beat me at this point. And then the next thing is Quacks goes past, and Hildebrand goes past, and suddenly I'm 4th. And I lost. I panicked. I lost it. I went out to lane 3 and tried to run around them all, and of course I ran that 3 or 4 yards extra, and came into the home straight, and I, within 10, 15 meters of the finish line, I was climbing stairs, and I thought I'd pick the bronze up, but I knew that the gold was gone, and then the disappointment was that Hildebrand dove across the line, and they. It
was quite a low dive, though, wasn't it? That was it the German Hildebrand? Yeah. Did you want to appeal that? I mean, I spoke to a coach the other day that said, all credit to Rod Dixon and his sporting ethos. He didn't appeal that. You could have appealed that.
No, there was a rule at the time that I understood from the coach that you had to pass across at 1 meter above the line. And I said, well, the photo, because we were showing the photo, because they took the 4 runners and they took us aside, and all the others were taken away, and we had to wait for the photo to tell us. And then they came over and they looked at Varian, and they said, and then they looked at Quacks, and then they looked at Hildebrand, and then they looked at me and they go, bye-bye.
Fantastic. Let's go to Pete Robbins' question, and then I think we've got Lewis Moses and Colin Lancaster wanting some clarification about what you think tempo running is. Pete Robbins, Rod, what do you think the Poms and Kiwis might do to make inroads to challenging the East Africans? Are you a pessimist? Are you an optimist? You know, I mean, the East Africans have taken over. It's wonderful to see, but can you ever see a revival in Great Britain or New Zealand running fortunes globally?
Well, I'm going to say to you straight away, Matt, if it was a level playing field, yes. However, we know that the East Africans have had more positive tests than any other nation in track and field. It's rampant. It's out of control, and I speak to a lot of young athletes who know that this is going on. That there is widespread doping, that even, I think the shoes are even producing now. It's not a level playing field. And it's just like, I've said, with Tour de France and that, I said, why don't we just have a standard bike for everybody and we just go out and ride? And if you test anywhere along the line, you're out, you're gone. And I said, and maybe we'll start running the marathon in bare feet like Abibi Bikila did in 1960 in Rome. I said, we've got to have a level playing field. But however, what I have said, that even if we had a track or a course or whatever in the Pacific Islands, and you had a 100-mile radius where nobody is allowed to come in, and you had all the athletes there to run $1 million race, they'd still find a way to bring the dope in with submarines. It's very sad. And I see it because I see it overwhelmed by the pressure that they're under. And it's so sad because there's no... It's controlled by the agents, and it's controlled by the shoe companies, and there's widespread corruption.
Absolutely, but on a positive side, I certainly believe that there's a subcultural element to success. We had Vet and Cram in the 80s. In your era, you've mentioned people like Dixon and Sir John Walker, people like that. Success can breed success, can't it?
Yes. Yeah. And it's, and it was, John and I did appeal to the athletic people in New Zealand, and they shunned us. They really did. And I will say that they were very, very demanding and very unreasonable in our athletic days. And then when we said, I believe we should be part of the coaching program and the development program, and I said I'm particularly focused with my kids' programs, and I said it starts at kindergarten. I said, and the journey begins there to graduation. I said at some point, the sport should be involved in developing in-school programs. And of course, they said, well, we're developing club programs. And I said, well, with all due respect, it starts at school. It starts at school.
Yeah, starts at school.
So we just didn't have that ability to convince them to help us, and we were shunned. And I went offshore, and as Peter Snell did, and a lot of our athletes in our day, we weren't honoured by what we wanted to do for our country. Now it could be a little different. I'm really looking forward to developing my kids program with the government after the elections.
Sure. Great answer. Yeah. Colin Lancaster's come back, and also a good friend of mine, Lewis Moses, a Loughborough-based coach, excellent guy. Can we clarify what you meant by a tempo run? And how did you vary tempo running? Just want to get this technically right, particularly for the coaches and athletes listening, Rod.
Well, see, our tempo runs were based on quarter effort, half effort, three-quarter effort, 7/8 effort. Very, very few times, it was full effort. I mean, you can't run full effort for more than 50 or 60 yards anyway. So there was no point in running yourself completely out, because there was no point in that. but you could hold 7/8 effort for a good half mile to a mile. So a lot of the training was based on quarter effort, half effort, three-quarter effort. And what we would do is you would establish what your goal is. So everything was off the 400-meter time. So whatever you ran a 400-meter on, that's how you scaled all your training. And so a quarter effort would be based off your 7/8 or full effort over 400 meters, and you'd scale it on a percentage level. It was kind of, very, very basic and very simple, but it worked. It really worked. Nowadays, through coaching, and I must admit, and I've got it here, and you guys all know the Arthur Lydiard coaching
excellent course, yeah.
And and of course Lorraine is just such a sweetheart. I've known Lorraine since she was 18 years old, and we've been great friends. And there's no doubt, there's no doubt what Lorraine is doing with the Lydiard Foundation and her certification courses, that any of these coaches that are asking these questions, that's the course that you should get onto. There's Greg McMillan, who's just incredible. Mark Cucuzzello, Professor Mark Cucuzzello, and Lorraine do this course, and you basically go through the whole Lydiard principles and philosophy, and it's broken down. And in fact, I've been reading some of the support and endorsements that they've got, and we've got coaches from all over the world who understand those basic principles. Now, I will say that look out, because I'm working with Lorraine at doing a kids marathon certification for teachers and runners who will go into elementary schools and get kids moving with the basic ABC: agility, balance, coordination. Those are the skills that we've got to teach kids. And kids now enjoy running because it's not a form of punishment. In the old days, if you misbehave in class, you had to go and run a lap, and so therefore kids didn't like running because they didn't want to tell their parents that they were misbehaving and they had to run. So they didn't like to run. Now kids know that when you have a fun time and you run, we do the kids run, and then we play games, and we do relays, and we do things. And, you got the kids out there doing 35, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and they've had so much fun that they don't know they've even running.
Absolutely. Rod, we're coming to Spencer's quite rightly reminded us that you've given us your time. You've been very generous with your time, with all the fans that appreciate it. Have we got any final questions in the last 5 minutes that Spencer can put to us? Just, any sorts of questions or?
Yeah.
Yeah, Grace has got a good one. Grace Huff. How do I, as a coach, deal with rampant, I think that's meant to say rampant or pushy parents, we call it. They're my worst children. How you've got parents that want immediate success for their children. How would you deal with that?
Well, you see, I deal with what we call K-5, so it's kindergarten through to 12 years old. And when they become teenagers, I go bye-bye. No, but it's because it's the school program. But I must admit, whenever I do the program and I go in, and and I know the parents want to come and meet Rod Dixon, and I meet them all. And then when we're about to start, I get all the kids to turn to the parents, and I said, "Now, kids, we're going to say goodbye to our mums and dads and parents, and we say bye-bye." Because they're going to leave now. They're going to leave now, and and we stand there with our hands on our hips until the parents go. And then as soon as they go, there's a whole different energy for all the kids. They feel so happy, and now and they goof around or they play around. But when you get them to do their drills, they are so committed because they're not being disciplined or watched over by their parents. And I love the parents. But you've got a moment in time to leave these kids alone and just let them be. And when
Grace is practicing a wave now. She's practicing that wave already. Final questions, guys. We've got 2 or 3 minutes left. What was the toughest? Yeah, Bashir Hussein, a great. I think Bashir won a world silver at marathon running. What was the toughest aspect of your training program at age 22 and 33?
Oh well, the toughest aspect when I was 22 was getting my training done so I could go out with my mates for a beer, you know, or my girlfriend or whatever. At 33 was recovery, understanding the importance of recovery, and I had that pretty organized. I had that pretty well organized as far as knowing when to back off, and those little simple things I said earlier on. If you elevated heart rate in the morning, you've overtrained. You've got to give yourself time to recover. Eating nutrition is so important, and it's not taking hundreds of vitamins. It's just eating clean, simple food. And remember, stop eating bloody sugar. Cut it out as much as you can. It's in everything. It's there to get us addicted. You know that. Sugar is very, very addictive. The people that, all these sports drinks, they're addicted to them. You know that there's only 15 molecules between cocaine and sugar. I mean, the sugar companies know this. You get addicted. So stop having sugar. That is the worst thing you can have. Eat clean, eat organic, eat simple, get rest and sleep. And if you can't sleep 8 hours a night, then sleep whatever you do, but take an afternoon nap. These are you've got to play with it. You've got to enjoy it.
Yeah. Rod, it just remains for me and Spencer to thank you for your wonderful time, your wonderful insight. I can't think of a better webinar, which has been great. I mean, we've had coaches come in, we've had athletes, we've got just casual fans that remember Rod Dixon and your story. Thanks for sharing those wonderful memories, particularly about the New York City Marathon, particularly about the Lydiard Foundation, and particularly about your Olympic successes and that. So thanks ever so much for your time, and thank you for some brilliant questions. Been a privilege to interview you, Rod. Wish you every success in the future. I hope people will donate to that wonderful work that you're doing in the background there with the Kids Marathon, and we hope to see you over in England, renewing your rivalry with Steve Jones and people like that soon.
Exactly, we'd love to. And as I say, once we get this certification for teachers, parents, and coaches and runners, to go and volunteer at your local elementary school and just inspire these kids to get moving, because they were born to move and they love that encouragement. And that's something that we want to get to, and Lorraine is doing a fabulous job developing that. Brilliant. We're going to get this thing happen.
Rod, we salute you. You're a legend, and thank you so much, and thank you to Spencer Duval for